Welcome to the Fantasy Football Forge quarterbacks and tight ends video. Let's re-record this sucker since the audio was probably crappy on the other recording. I'm not even going to check it out to find out if it was or if I'm wasting my time because I'm just going to assume it was. Guys, thank you so much for tuning on into this video. We're going to go through some interesting usage. We're going to go through the quarterback injuries, plenty of them coming out of last week that could have impacts on, players for sure. And then we'll go over the tight ends, same things. We'll go over the loves and the fades. How did I do last week for my loves and my fades for the quarterbacks, for the tight ends, and this week, who are my loves and my fades this week? Let's get through this because I am absolutely starving. I'm about an hour late for my lunch because of all the technical difficulties I ended up having. Quarterback injuries last week. Daniel Jones, torn Achilles, out for the season. Yuck. Geno Smith, shoulder injury. Not sure how severe that is or is not, if he'll be returning this week or not. Tyrod Taylor, not sure if he'll be able to return this week or not from his groin injury. And Jaden Daniels, elbow injury on his non-throwing arm. To me, it kind of sounds like he's going to play this week, but honestly, with the ranking, I think I would probably keep it the same between him and Marcus Mariota either way. The quarterbacks and the running back videos already came out, so go check those out. My hair's a little bit messy today because I've been pulling it out, trying to figure those two out. I'm calling upon the community to help fine-tune the quarterbacks or the wide receivers and the running back rankings, but I do feel pretty good about the quarterbacks and the tight ends rankings. In fact, I have them tiered a little bit more tightly than we have a lot of times this season. There's some interesting information to come out of the quarterback's usage as of late. Tyler Shuck has been a top 12 quarterback in fantasy football 3 of the past 4 games, and he's only probably played 5 or 6 games. Stafford has been a top 8 quarterback all but 3 times since week 3. I wrote it wrong here. Stafford has not been a top 8 quarterback in only 3 games since week 3. 70% of his games, he has been a top 8 quarterback since week 3. All 3 different ways that we can say that Stafford's been very, very good for a while, most of the season. Patrick Mahomes was a top 10 quarterback 6 of the first 7 games on the season, but only once in the most recent 6 games on the season. And so, yeah, guys, I got too bold on Patrick Mahomes last week. My mistake. I will also say there is a universe where his wide receivers who normally catch those balls, Rashee Rice, Travis Kelce, both very good receivers, both good hands guys, drop balls that would have extended drives where they were in scoring position, and ultimately my expectations for Patrick Mahomes were part of why I liked him last week was I expected him to get a lot of rushing yards. He ends up with 50-plus rushing yards, so that portion of my expectation for him and why I was bold on him despite the poor matchup came true. Unfortunately, I should not have been as bold as I was on him. I'll just admit that outright. But, if those guys catch those balls and then they go on, I was expecting Patrick Mahomes, a lot of rushing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. Those are 2 drives where maybe he gets a passing touchdown if they convert on those 4th downs. And 227 passing yards or something. And that's roughly where he was at. Things happen. For my quarterback rankings this week, we've got Matt Stafford, Josh Allen, Drake May at the top. This column over here for average fantasy points per week with a twist of consistency. So best performers on the season. The darker the green, the better. And here the implied point total is, good to see. Scoring opportunities according to how Vegas thinks that these matchups are going to go. And the spread is, in the case of Drake May, they're expected to be losing, so they're not expected to be able to run the ball out near the end of the game. If they get an opportunity to try to score, maybe you get a loose Buffalo defense, some free yardage totals down the end would be the hope there, but that's what that kind of column might give you an idea of. Or if they're heavily favored, like Jalen Hurts, maybe they're running the ball a lot down the stretch, not passing so much. Maybe the ceiling of that player gets capped a little bit. So this is my second tier. By the way, Matt Stafford, Josh Allen, Drake May, I think everybody's going to have these guys at their top 3 this week. So that's where I made that little tier cutoff before we get to Dak Prescott, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Jared Goff. In the cases of Joe Burrow, Jared Goff, I'm a little bit more optimistic about those 2 this week. I would say Jared Goff, kind of like a floor of 2 passing touchdowns. Los Angeles Rams have really good run-stuffing defense, so it might be hard for them to pound it in, and that could create 1 additional touchdown for Jared Goff. So, honestly, I'm expecting Jared Goff to have 3 passing touchdowns this week and maybe 1 rushing touchdown for the team. For the other wide receivers, Dak Prescott, Going to have to be efficient on maybe fewer targets. Very possible this week for Dak Prescott, but also very possible that he does do that. Did I say targets? Pass attempts, efficiency, expecting him hopefully to get into the end zone. There are some reasons for concern. Maybe no CeeDee Lamb this week. It could obviously hurt, and once again, in a game where they're expected to win, they could be rushing a lot, and yeah, so going to have to be efficient, but with a guy like George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb, if he's available, that's always possible. Jalen Hurts, coming off of a really rough week, gets a much better matchup, but also they might be running a lot, so that's the concern there. Lamar Jackson turns it around last week, really good matchup, but prior to that, it was really ugly, and honestly, it was pretty ugly for like half of that game last week, too. So, no slam dunks there, but I think you got to start those guys if you've got them. And then that's going to bring us on to this next tier. Still a group who I feel pretty confident putting out there. Jackson Dart. The main concern, and why he's not a tier above here in a good matchup against Washington, is that the team, they didn't call any quarterback rushes, and he only rushed the ball, scrambled 3 times as well. In his first week back after concussion, new offensive coordinator, I think there's going to be a focus on limiting those rushing attempts for Jackson Dart rest of season, and that, of course, hurts the floor and the ceiling for a guy who has been absolutely fantastic when he's been out there as a quarterback for fantasy purposes. Patrick Mahomes right behind that. Jaden Daniels, Marcus Mariota, really good matchup, right behind that. Baker Mayfield against Atlanta. He just hasn't been producing as good as some of these guys. Atlanta, a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde of a defense, but whatever. I'm going to trust him a little bit more than Brock Purdy and Trevor Lawrence. Love the floor for Brock Purdy and Trevor Lawrence this week. I have no problem, once again, starting them. However, ceiling-wise, in matchups where they're expected, I'm just expecting these teams to run a lot, to have a lot of success on the ground. Although for Brock Purdy, that's a little bit less so because Tennessee's actually a really good run-stuffing defense, but also, they have Christian McCaffrey. So it goes back and forth. Hopefully for Brock Purdy, he ends up throwing a lot of touchdowns. That could still be very possible in this matchup, even if they have a big lead and rushing the ball a lot. That's going to bring us on to this next tier. There's positives and negatives to those two, but just the ceilings of those two, because of how those game flows might go, are a little bit concerning. But that brings us on to this next tier. Geez. I'm going from Bo Nix down to J.J. McCarthy, my quarterback 15 down to 25. Usually this is more like quarterback 9 to 18 or something like that, but a little bit of a different tier break this week, which is nice. Bo Nix, Jordan Love, you could flip these two just perfectly fine. I would not argue against that. Similar implied point totals, similar productions on the season. I just kind of gave Bo Nix the nod there by a little bit. Game flow, they might be having to pass to try to catch up. Production on the season, Bo Nix has been a little bit better than Jordan Love on the season. Defensive-wise, neither one of them are good matchups, but I think Green Bay is the slightly better quarterback matchup. Then we've got Caleb Williams right behind that. Not a great matchup, but, I'm fine playing him. Justin Herbert, I'm fine playing him against Kansas City. I do think there's a little bit of an upside where Kansas City struggles to get pressure on quarterbacks this year. It hasn't been their strength, and that's where the Chargers really struggle is when they're getting highly pressured. But that offensive line, that's been a pretty consistent factor. So I'm not banking on that too much. Definitely concerned about Justin Herbert. Not as much as I am concerned about Jacoby Brissett this week. I'm fading Jacoby against Houston. Really, really, really bad quarterback matchup. Probably the worst, probably the best defense in the league. Implied point total Vegas. Also not having too much faith in that. Whereas Sam Darnold, I am going to love this week. I might end up flipping these two, going up against Indianapolis. Indianapolis' team maybe where they are. But the thing is they also could be running the ball, a fair bit down the stretch. Sam Darnold, that offense has been fantastic pretty much all season, but fantasy-wise, it hasn't really resulted in fantastic games for Sam Darnold. Nonetheless, going to love him this week. CJ Stroud right behind that. Plenty of reasons to like him. Also be concerned in this matchup. Not the best quarterback matchup in the world, but implied point total pretty nice there. And you can't really trust their rushing attack, even in a good rushing matchup. So maybe we just get a normally nice game from CJ Stroud. I like the floor for him. Aaron Rodgers, kind of like the floor for him against Miami. Tyler Shuck, Bryce Young, J.J. McCarthy. I could see any number of Sam Darnold to J.J. McCarthy here outproducing, having better games than Jacoby, Justin, Caleb, Jordan Love, Bo Nix. very, very possible. And then our next tier, a little less faith in Shedeur Sanders, Tua, Kirk Cousins, Cam Ward, but I don't think that is the end of the world if you have to play any of these guys. Whereas Indianapolis, whoever it is at the quarterback, going against Seattle, don't like that. New York Jets, whoever it is, going against Jacksonville, don't really like that. Geno Smith, whoever it is, he also might not play this week. Going up against Philadelphia, don't like that. That's going to bring us on to the tight ends. We'll start out with the tight end injuries. Zach Ertz, knee ACL, torn, out for the season, sucks, probably career-ending. David Njoku, knee injury, not ranking him this week, could obviously help Harold Fannin, who's already been getting on the field quite a bit, and, that might have helped his numbers this last week, but since Shedeur Sanders has come back, he seemed to really be entrenched in as that tight end role and out there a lot. And then Darnell Washington had a concussion, not ranking him this week. Interesting usage, going right back. Fannin has been on the field more with Shedeur Sanders in at quarterback. Mike Gesicki is getting some decently consistent usage since his return. Nice little floor, and then, the touchdown upside is higher, obviously, with Joe Burrow and at quarterback as well with that offense, just being more efficient. And then Darren Waller's route share dropped in week 14, so you're welcome to all the people I told not to play Darren Waller last week. This is our first tier. Trey McBride might have a bit of a down week again here against Houston. George Kittle, definitely hoping for that touchdown or two against Tennessee. Tyler Warren, so I'm shooting for the touchdown with George Kittle. I'm not really expecting the touchdown for Tyler Warren. However, I do like the floor for Tyler Warren. Teams target their tight ends at an extremely high rate against Seattle, so I'm expecting whoever's in that quarterback for Indianapolis will probably pepper Tyler Warren a decent amount with targets this game. Dalton Kincaid, we're hunting for that touchdown yet again there. Wouldn't mind putting him even higher in the rankings, but not quite going to get there because the targets are always shaky for him. And then Brock Bowers, you always feel pretty good about the targets, but this week against Philadelphia, going to put him at the bottom of this top tier because it's a really, really bad tight end matchup. Bottom 2 in the league, if you ask me. That'll bring us on to this next tier. Theo Johnson, my love of the week, my tight end 6. And I gotta do a little cherry pick and show you some numbers here. So, in games with Jackson Dart, which is what we're actually already seeing. But if we remove the 2 games going against Philadelphia, who I just expressed is one of the defenses in the league that I actually legitimately try to avoid playing tight ends against, whoever they are almost, except for the very elite of tight ends. We remove those games where he actually did have a solid game, a 10-plus point half PPR game against Philadelphia, I believe at least their second matchup. He still had a decent game there, but let's just remove Philadelphia from the equation. Then this number goes from 21.6 up to 27.5 for the EV score equalized value. Average fantasy points per game with a twist of consistency is what this column is. That would be the second highest out of all tight ends at 27.5, making him the second best tight end according to my rankings on the season. This is not perfectly fair, removing Philadelphia from him and not removing it from anybody else, obviously. This is cherry-picked, and nobody else is that cherry-picked. And then 6.8, a whole target more here, 5.8 on the season, 6.8 average targets per game, removing those Philadelphia games. That would be the 4th most out of all tight ends in terms of average targets per game on this list. So, Theo Johnson, definitely been the apple of the eye for Jackson Dart and very productive, and I expect that to continue this week because through the first 13 weeks, Washington has allowed the 7th most half PPR fantasy points to the tight end position out of any defense. So I think it's a really good matchup. The implied point total is very nice according to Vegas as well here. I'm playing Theo and feeling really confident about it. Got him ahead of Travis Kelce, ahead of Jake Ferguson. No real problems with any of these guys. Brenton Strange hunting for that touchdown. Like that touchdown possibility. Harold Fannin, don't love the touchdown possibility. You could flip these two just fine. I don't mind it. Full PPR, I would. But in half PPR, I'm going to hunt for that touchdown from Brenton Strange instead of not expecting really a touchdown for Harold Fannin. Juwan Johnson, similar story with him and Dallas Goedert. You could flip these two just fine. Full PPR, I'd definitely stick with Juwan Johnson over Dallas Goedert. But in half PPR, it would be fine if you wanted to hunt for this touchdown with Dallas Goedert over Juwan Johnson. In this case, I ended up going with the floor here by just a little margin. And that'll bring us on to the next tier. I could have just done this. Let's just pop the cherry, pull this all the way down, whatever. So, there's your next two tiers. Next tier, I have Kyle Pitts at the top of this tier because he deserves to be based on his production on the season, but I am currently ranking Drake London. So this is expecting Drake London to be back. The implied point total a little bit on the lower side. The guaranteed higher amounts of targets a little bit lower when Drake London's available. And with Kirk Cousins, that offense has really been struggling. Dalton Schultz, I do feel pretty darn comfortable about him. Like him, touchdown, upside, even fair, but really it's just a floor play for him. So just like we talked about with Juwan Johnson, Dallas Goedert, Harold Fann, and Brenton Strange, for full PPR, I'm definitely going to go Dalton Schultz over Mark Andrews. Half PPR, if you want to shoot for that 2-touchdown game from Mark Andrews, I mean, 1 touchdown feels pretty confident that might happen against Cincinnati. Really good tight end matchup, but 2-touchdown game, always in the realm this week for Mark Andrews. Wouldn't be too shocked if we got one of those against Cincy. And I have them all ahead of Hunter Henry here. I am fading Hunter Henry this week going up against Buffalo. Buffalo is the worst tight end matchup in all of fantasy football through the first 13 weeks, and that's not really a fluke. They've been a really tough tight end matchup year in and year out the last few years. Looking at their numbers up through the first 13 weeks, they've only allowed 2.4 receptions to tight ends on average per game. That's the least. The second least is 3.6 average receptions, a full target and a fifth more. That's a big difference between the two. They've only allowed 27 yards on average per game to the tight end position, to all tight ends on the opposing team. That is the very least. The second least was 35 yards. Pretty big difference there of 8 yards, actually. I know it doesn't sound like it's huge, but when you average at this point in the season, that is a pretty big difference. It's significant. And they've tied for the least touchdowns allowed with the Atlanta Falcons, 0.1 average touchdowns per week allowed, so probably just 1 touchdown allowed. I think that means throughout the entirety of the season to the tight end position. Now, I'm still going to go Hunter Henry over Darren Waller. Darren Waller, very touchdown reliant. I'm considering Hunter Henry this week to be more just like a boom or bust touchdown reliant guy, but Vegas likes them to have more scoring opportunities, and I don't disagree with that. Plus, a little bit of a higher average targets per week for Hunter Henry than Darren Waller. Anyways, on the season, brings us to the next tier. Rondé Gadsden. Kansas City's not a good tight end matchup. They're pretty consistently just above average, solid against tight ends. So I don't love tight ends going against them anyways. So yeah, he just makes it to the top of this tier. Whereas Evan Ingram, if you wanted to go for a floor here, I wouldn't mind it for Evan Ingram. I think it's tough to play him over Rondé Gadsden, which is why I have him behind that. But Green Bay is a really good tight end matchup, so Evan Ingram, a solid floor play. Colson Loveland ends up running fewer routes, actually, last week than Cole Kmet, so that's a little bit concerning. A.J. Barner, you're looking for the touchdown. Mason Taylor, you're looking for targets and a floor, but not a touchdown. T.J. Hockenson, somewhere in between these two. Definitely touchdown reliant, but against Dallas, you're hoping that there'll be a lot of back and forth and maybe more targets than average to TJ in this game. Always possible. Not really expecting it. And Isaiah Likely, you're hoping for a touchdown. He has actually outproduced Mark Andrews over the last 3 week span. Not a big sample size, so I'm still going to rank Mark Andrews more, but in a good tight end matchup, you could definitely see him coming through and having another good week. That's always possible. Pat Freiermuth, Jonnu Smith also in really good matchups here against Miami, so you'd like that if you're desperate. Not the worst play is Mike Gesicki, not the worst play if you're desperate. Gunnar Helm comes with some sort of little bit of a floor as of late, actually. He's been 6 targets twice over the last 3 weeks. Chigozie Okonkwo, Luke Musgrave, Kadon Bensonet, and Dawson Knox are all kind of Hail Mary types of plays. I would put them in that category. And then I really hope you're not having to try to choose one of these guys, and I wouldn't recommend it. David Njoku, Tyler Higbee, and then Darnell Washington are all not being ranked right now, and Brock Wright, I believe, is on IR, so call it him out of the week. So that's the quarterbacks. That's the tight ends. Thank you so very much for tuning on in. Please don't forget to like the video. You can tune in on Thursday and Sunday prior to the games, 3 hours at least, 3.5 hours maybe on Sunday. I'm here for any of your start sit questions, and 1.5 hours or so prior to kickoff on Thursday evenings. Thank you so much, guys. Take care. Bye-bye. Let's get you some wins here for fantasy, the playoffs.